English on which are kritis on Mahaganapati are among his well-known acclaimed books. And he has presented many papers, research papers in the at state, national, and international seminars and symposia, and published many good research articles in many research journals, and also lectured on many as a source person in for many workshops. Okay, in webinars, and published many books on his to his credit, and also has a teaching experience teaching to the students of MA on Indian ancient Indian history and archaeology. So that is the brief experience and resume of Professor Dr. Manoj. So with this brief introduction, I'm glad to invite Dr. Manoj to our talk to our audience, and I request him to you may begin your talk and presentation. So audience are ready to listen and follow.
Sir, you're muted.
Sir, you unmute, sir. Unmute. Unmute. Archaran.
Yes, sir.
He says how to.
There's an arrow
How
down.
to share. How to share.
Yeah. I'll just have to allow it to share.
Let alone, no?
Yeah. Settings.
Sir, we are just working on it. We are
controls.
sharing your screen.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. Okay.
There only.
We are sharing your screen, sir.
No, ask him to share that button.
Okay.
Namaskaram to everybody.
Yeah.
Hope
Hello.
I'm audible now.
Yes, sir. You are audible. Can you share the screen?
That's what I'm asking. Where should I share it?
Bottom.
Bottom. Just next to the hand, there will be one option.
Okay. Present now.
Arrow which is going up.
Okay.
You can press that and you can share it.
Now there are two things. Your entire screen, window, tab. Which one should I
Entire
press?
screen.
Okay. Now where do I get the next option?
You can click on the entire screen and you can start.
No, I'm not able to see my PPT here. I'm seeing only this screen.
Now you open your PPT. Sir.
Double click on the screen.
First you open the PPT, then
You open the PPT, sir.
Not able to see.
Okay, I opened the PPT.
Now you share the screen, entire screen.
Okay, wait. No, sir, it's not working.
Share the presentation.
You shouldn't share the presentation.
Sir, your presentation is not shared, not getting shared.
That's what I'm not able to get it here.
Keep it open, sir.
I have opened it.
It's
coming and disappearing.
Go for share window.
Okay, so
It's coming and
share.
disappearing.
No.
Share window.
Share window, the option is not highlighted.
A window.
Let me see here once again. One second.
Yeah. Now.
Okay.
Now it is showing the multiple windows, sir, in front of you.
Now can you see?
Yes.
Now we can see. Yes, sir. Yes.
Now you can go for the full screen, sir.
Okay.
Full screen option.
Slideshow mode.
Okay. I will go to the full screen option after my brief introduction.
Okay, sir.
Yes, sir. Yeah,
I think that would be fine.
Yeah, you may begin, sir.
Mute from here. Yeah, I'll just. Sir, we can see the presentation. You can start, sir.
Okay. So again, namaskarams to everybody. I'm getting some other thing on the screen that's a bit okay. Okay, I think everything is set fine now. So here I would like to take up this lecture with three main aspects. One is understanding the concept of temple first. What is a temple? What is the purpose of a temple? Of course, architecture students deal with the structural part of the temple, but we have to always understand that the utility, the purpose, and the intention is reflected in the structure of the temple also. Therefore, we will have this basic understanding of what a temple is. Then we will have a small introduction into what the Western scholars have really worked on our architecture, and they have had some of their own limitations. With that, in the third part, I will introduce you to the basic concepts of temple architecture based on the indigenous sources. See, what happens usually, temple is a purely an Indian concept. And we have to understand through our texts, our sources, and our mindset. So what happens naturally, if the onlooker is a Westerner or something from an outside this tradition, they may not be able to assess a lot of things as we do it personally. So therefore, first we'll understand what is this concept of temple basically is. What is temple architecture and why does it such an important role when it comes to architecture? So what happens basically in the modern days, in the contemporary days, a lot of us have a misguided notion that temple is something very purely related to religious activities. It is a place where you conduct only ritualistic activities like pujas, homas, and other things are done. And that's all. Temple is just where you go, seek, whatever you have wishes, you offer it to the God, and it's something very religious. As I said, it is only related to prayers. But in the ancient Indian society, from the earliest days, temple had never limited itself to such a narrow thought of only doing some prayers or pujas, or it was not with such a narrow concept that this temple was being built. Temple was actually the nucleus part of a society. And the entire, see, there was a notion, and there are many proverbs also in vernacular languages which say that a place or a village or a township without a temple is equal to a cemetorium. It is equal to a smashana. Meaning to say that this temple was the nucleus of the society, and it guided, designed, and the entire social activities around it was wound around this structure of a temple. So therefore, temple had both the materialistic and worldly approach, as well as the spiritual approach, where many spiritualistic people have also taken use or made use of the temple structures. So what was this? The form of temple in ancient India. If you understand that, so why do we need to understand this would be the question. See, when you are studying temple architecture, for example, you may find a lot of pavilions in a temple complex. When you are studying Vijayanagara period temples, when you are studying Orison temples, you may find some other kind of structures. So why are they being built? What is their utility? Are they just decorative? So to understand this, you have to basically understand what was the concept behind a temple. Likewise, as I was mentioning, it was not restricted only to the puja, but of course that was one of the major activities that happened in a temple. So it was multi-purpose. Of the many purposes the temple served, it was a place where education was imparted. Then it was a place where legal disputes were settled. It was a place where a lot of cultural activities were nurtured, a place where literature, dance, music, and all these cultural things, they were nurtured, and they were they were they were literally practiced in the temple premises. Apart from this, temple also contributed greatly to the commerce of that contemporary period and places. A lot of banking was done in temple, a way of banking that was conducted in the temple. So there were other, minor and major kind of businesses associated with the temple or which grew around the temple. So like this, temple was just not restricted to one part. So what happens, all these activities, as I said, temple acted as a place where social gatherings were done, social functions were done. For example, marriages and other such activities were conducted in the temple premises. And there were a lot of debates and lectures on various fields of thought. It was not always being spiritual or whatever, even otherwise, other part, like, for example, if some new composition or a literary composition was composed, so a discussion on the composition would be held in the temple premises. Like, so various activities. And if you want to understand further, now temples have a huge corpus of inscriptions carved on their walls and independent inscription slabs. So what does this furnish? It shows these inscriptions are generally, they generalize telling it they were all donations given to the temple or whatever. But if we have a micro level observation of these inscriptions, we come to know that a lot of commercial activities were done in this temple. For example, if somebody has donated some amount of gold or money, currency, whatever, for temple, they say this donation is given for a long duration. So how will some amount of money, how will it sustain for a long duration? We have to understand that that money was usually given as loans or debts for people who needed it, and whatever interest that money generated, it was used for the maintenance of the temple, renovation of the temple, or various other things which happened in the temple. And likewise, temple also provided professional opportunities for a lot of people. Now, if a temple was there, built, a lot of people were appointed for maintaining the water sources like the wells, the pushkarinis, and vapis, stepped wells, and all these things were built around, in and around the temples. Why I am mentioning these things particularly is, all these constitute the part of the temple architecture. Temple architecture does not just confine to the sanctum sanctorum or the garbhagriha of the temple. Even the water sources like the well and other sources, they were also dug around the temple. They had to be maintained. People were appointed to maintain those pushkarinis. And there were other things like gardens were maintained by the temples. So people were appointed to take care of the temple gardens. And many people got professions like making of the garlands, selling of various other incenses and other things related to the temple. So overall, temple had this concept of providing jobs and professions to various set of people. So in temple, we have another concept called as Angabhoga and Rangabhoga. Angabhoga means the regular pujas done to the presiding deity of the temple. So there were a lot of priests and their assistants who were appointed to the maintenance of those rituals and pujas. Likewise, Rangabhoga meant there were a lot of cultural activities like music, dance, recitation of Puranas, imparting the knowledge of the Vedanta. All these activities happened in the temple. Like it was done in a regular basis. And for that, a lot of artists were patronized. There were a lot of dancers, musicians, and people who could, orators. All these peoples were employed by the temple, and they had to take care of what is called as Rangabhoga. So it created a huge amount of employment. And as you all know, temple has been a gallery of beautiful sculptures and many intricate carvings done for the decoration of the temple. Some of them have have a lot of symbolism in that, while some of them are purely decorative. So naturally, temples also provided profession for many sculptors and artisans. Artisans like carpenters and the painters and all these class of people, they gained their jobs through temple. So why I'm telling all these things is when we try to understand what a temple is, we should not just think temple is a place where you can just go or give some plantains and coconuts and get the prasadam and we return. No, that is not the only purpose of temple. And unfortunately, in the modern days, we see that even the temples have become very commercialized. Therefore, for common people, the concept of temple is being a bit degenerated. And as I said, when these activities like the commercial activities and the other employment activities which are done by the temple, if they constitute the worldly aspect of the temple, there was a spiritual aspect also where people who wanted to pursue their higher spiritual sadhanas, as we call it, they could take asylum in the temples, and they also contributed for the development of the spiritual part of the temple, and they also gained by the benefit of the presence of a temple there. So this is the overall concept of a temple. So whenever you are studying a temple, in person, because architecture students, you may have to visit a lot of temples to understand their architecture and other things. So when you are visiting a temple, we should have that in mind that these were all the activities which were done in a temple, so that we will have a broader expanse to understand what a temple building is all about. Next, coming to the study of temple architecture by the Western scholars. Now, as we all know, the study of the so-called archaeological method of studying this temple started somewhere in the mid of 19th century by very good eminent scholars like we had Alexander Cunningham, we had Alexander Reeve, we had Henry Cousins, Percy Baum, and all these eminent scholars have studied our temple architecture with a very, a research methodology type they have done it. But these scholars had their own limitations. Again, it is another misfortune for Indians that though we have, politically we might have gained independence, but when it comes to academics or such fields, many of the fields, we are still not independent. We are just blindly continuing with whatever the British colonizers had left to us, whatever they had introduced to us. Even today, we are just blindly studying them. Here, I do not deny that they need not be studied, nor am I commenting that their work is wrong. Their work is very extensive, very right, in their own perspective. So we have to understand which are the points where we have to accept the Western knowledge, Western work done on our Indian temple architecture, and which are the points where we have to correct ourselves, come out of that thought process, westernized thought process, and understand Indian architecture, temple architecture, better with our indigenous sources. So what are these sources? I will also briefly introduce them. As I said, this lecture entirely would concentrate only on briefly introducing these concepts for the students. So therefore, when you take up scholars like Percy Brown or Henry Cousins, and they have done, yeoman service. Their service is unparalleled. Even, post-independent Indian scholars cannot match the work they have done with all the modern technology. Today, the technology is so improved. We have so many, gadgets which serve as, they help us for the purpose of research. Like we have digital cameras, we have radars and other things which can detect other things. We have instruments which can date the stone and all those things. But still, the amount of labor those scholars have put, our scholars have not even attempted to do that. So, but what were the limitations they had? If you understand that, we will understand how to judge a temple in the Indian psyche. These Western scholars, they did not actually deal deep with the literary sources we have as far as temple architecture was concerned. So they had this concept that whatever structural evidence they get, they relied only on the structural evidence. They did not look into the literature evidence or the epigraphical sources, then they just started deciding or dating something. So the best example I can give here is, now Percy Brown, when he has studied the Indian temple architecture, and this is supported by many Western scholars. See, they found that the Buddhist relics, the architectural remains of the Buddhists were huge in number. And they could be dated back up to almost 4th century before the Common Era, BC as we call it. But when they started looking out for the temple architecture of Vedic pantheon, they could get the structural temple evidence only from the Gupta period. So therefore, they started, calling that Gupta era was the dawn of Hindu temple architecture. So before that, Hindus did not know, they did not have the building of a temple. So all they did was just, they did only yajnas and yagas, Vedic rituals were done. But seeing the Buddhist communal prayers and other things, with this influence, they started building the temple. Now, this is one argument they place. And then, while searching for the structural evidence, when we come to the Karnataka concept, because in the context of Karnataka, Percy Brown has worked a lot. So here they observe that the structural evidence begins from the Badami Chalukyan period. So Badami Chalukyas, then they suddenly call that the Badami Chalukya period was the dawn of South Indian architecture. Aihole was the cradle of South Indian temple architecture or Dravida architecture. And then they have this Pattadakal was the laboratory of temple architecture. Like this, they have made many statements. These statements cannot be blindly accepted. This is where we have to put our analysis, our research, and our hypothesis to say that no, this is not right. There are many sources which talk about the existence of temple and temple culture from an earlier period. So, to quote some examples, Ramayana, which is one of the earliest epics, it's one of the earliest Sanskrit literary work, and it is known to almost all the Indians. Ramayana, there will be no Indian who doesn't know about Ramayana. But the problem is, you do not read Ramayana, the original text by Valmiki. We just go through some translations or by the hearsays and we judge upon Ramayana. So if you read Ramayana leisurely in detail, we get many instances where there is a mention about temples being taken care by, which have to be patronized by the kings. And there are questions and answers which talk about the maintenance of the temple, and all these things are mentioned in Ramayana itself. So Ramayana is undoubtedly not a post-Buddhist concept. So when Ramayana talks about temple, we have to understand that temple structures existed from the earliest day. So second source, a literary source we can authentically rely upon is the Arthashastra of Chanakya. So Arthashastra of Chanakya also is dated to the Mauryan period, which is 3rd century BC. And here also Chanakya mentions that temples of all the creeds where people of various groups pray must be built inside a fort. And he also mentions which are the temples to be built in the fort, at which corners and other things. So this further strengthens the argument that the knowledge of temple building was there quite earlier the Buddhist period. I'm not denying that the Buddhists were not proper architects, that's not the argument. But the concept of building a temple was not derived from Buddhist origin, but even before the advent of Buddhism, this culture of temple building was very much known amongst the commoners in Indian subcontinent. Then we have epigraphical evidences which throws light upon these elements. So now there is one inscription in Talagunda of Shikaripur Taluk of Shivamogga district, which talks about the temple of Pradeshwara. Now this inscription is actually a Kadamba inscription by the Kadamba king Ravi Varma, and he gives the complete genealogy of the dynasty. So Kadambas ruled Karnataka during the 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries. This is again an established historical fact. So he says, thus they renovated the temple of Pradeshwara, and he says there is a mention in the inscription that the antiquity of this temple dates back to Shatakarni. The Shatakarni has done pujas in this particular temple. So who was Shatakarni? Shatakarni is a name taken by the Shatavahana rulers. And all the history researchers and students know that Shatavahanas ruled somewhere between 150 BC to 200 AD, 2nd century BC to 2nd century AD. So by this time itself, the concept of temple and temple building was known. Then why did this concept arise amongst the Britishers would be the next question. So what happened? The earliest temples which were consecrated by any king for that matter throughout Indian subcontinent, they were built of softer mediums like wood, brick, mortar, bamboo, and such things were used. And naturally, all these things are perishable materials. They are not very stable materials. Therefore, they might have been frequently rebuilt or frequently renovated. Many a times, they might have got completely damaged. They might have been completely rebuilt. Or even the original structures of brick, mortar, or wood may have been converted into the stone structures in the later period, but during the Badami Chalukyan period and onwards. Because we get such sources, as I was mentioning the inscription from Talagunda, which mentions that this temple is as early as the period of Shatakarni. So when we find such mentions, we can understand that this temple building tradition is an age-old practice in India. Coming to the statements like cradle of architecture. Now they say that Aihole is the cradle of architecture. Why do they call that? Because we find that a lot of experiments have been done in the temple architecture, and we find some structures which are very simple, very plain, very, very small, very, very utilitarian. Such structures are formed. And again, there are very huge, big, elaborate temples with a lot of, sculptural heritage and sculptural decoration and other things found. So probably Britishers thought, as there are some very humble structures in Aihole, they felt, no, this was where the architecture began, and they called it cradle. But if you observe, the pillar types we find in Badami, Patatkal, and Aihole, they are already mentioned greatly in the Vastu Granthas. We may also argue that the Vastu Granthas might have seen the structures and then adopted. No problem. But the sculptors knew that this kind of pillars with this such and such a name should be carved. And then we have a lot of sculptures of various deities like Ardhanarishwara, Vishnu Murti, Varaha, Narasimha, and all that. If we see the maturity of the carving and how much of these sculptures are adhered to the Vedic literature and the iconographical texts of India, we can understand that it is not an overnight transfusion. From some nothing, they cannot create such massive and very impressive sculptures and buildings, architectural members. So therefore, what happens? When we are relying on the Western sources, the main thing we have to concentrate, which really is a unparalleled work by the Western scholars, are the temple plans which they have done to the scale. We have a lot of temple plans which the Western scholars have done throughout India. And then the second part where we have to follow Percy Brown especially, and Henry Cousins and others, are the conjectural restorations they have done. See, they have used their imagination to rebuild how the original structure would have been with the existing examples and whatever remnants they have found. This is another, appreciable work which they have done. The conjectural restorations, for example, the Santhara Temple, the conjectural restoration by Percy Brown will give you a beautiful idea of how that last temple would have been. So this is very essential for the architecture students, especially while calculating the height, the length, the breadth, and the girth of the stone pillars and everything. It is very essential. The third point where the Western scholars are excellent and we have to have an approach towards this, they are very keen observers. Though they have taken only the evidences which we see them, that is, we call it as pratyaksha, that they have taken, we can know that they have observed a lot of some tribal structures, village moats, rural structures, and they have understood and analyzed how these tribal and village and rural structures would have inspired the technicians to plan out a modern structure in those days. So a structure with which can be built through stone and other medium of building. So from when the temples began to be built by a stronger medium like stone, then we do not have, then all the temples have not perished. We have, of course, lost thousands of temples because of vandalism, because of many other reasons. But otherwise, the temples built, they stand as a testimony for the technique and Sthapatya Veda of our ancient India, which is really very, very surprising. So I'll just make one more point before I show my presentation here. So another approach we have to understand through this text, especially for students of architecture, is how were these temples built? Now we have so much of modern technology. We can make cement pillars, this and all those things. We can dig ground very deep. Everything is there. Take the Prastara Temple for example. Prastara Temple on the whole is a structure which is more than 200 feet tall from its base. So the superstructure itself is about 180 and odd feet. The entire structure, when they built this temple, they have not used any medium of adhesive. They have not used mortar. They have not used any other adhesive at all. It is just the placement of stones, dressed stones and decorated stones. They have done calculating the gravitation force, the weight, how does it bear, and they have built this structure above the ground level, and it stands there for the past 1010 years or 12 years from now. It is almost 1012 years till the Pradeshwara Temple was built. And the foundation below the ground level for the temple is barely 5 feet. It's barely 5 feet. Today, if you are constructing a four-floored building in the modern days, imagine what would the basement and pillar strength you would have provided, the foundation. But the entire Pradeshwara temple stands on a foundation below the ground level only by 4 or 5 feet, that's all. So this shows the amount of calculation the sculptors and the sthapatis or the temple builders in those days had, that it has withstood earthquakes, lightning, shine, rain, everything for the past 1010 years. It is something which is very, very, very commendable and appreciable. It is not, I don't think the modern technology can actually do such a work. So how was this achieved? So to understand these things also, we surely need to have the knowledge of the indigenous granthas. Now, I will take up two aspects here. One, what is the spiritual concept of a temple? Then what is the structural description of a temple according to our indigenous sources? How to move the slides here?
Sir, just press the cursor button down or side on.
No, it is not happening.
Or you click on that right side bottom, there is a screen, so right? You know how to do the full screen, sir?
Full screen, yeah, I know.
You can do the full screen and then press any key, that arrow key, it will move.
Is it moving now?
is moving.
Yes, sir. We can see the next slide, sir. Agamas and Vastu Grantha.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what are the sources of the text sources we have for the understanding the indigenous knowledge, temple building knowledge? So there are two literary branches which are broadly called as the Agamas and Vastu Granthas. Now, as we all have heard the term Vastu, especially in the modern days, the term Vastu is being greatly used and misused also by various people. So, Vastu Granthas are the texts or canons which are dedicated solely for the science of temple building architecture. So here these texts, they give such details like how a village has to be planned, how a town has to be planned, then how a temple has to be planned, and it begins from selecting the right site for building a temple or planning a township, which is the how should the site be, what should be the nature of the site, soil and everything, how should it be tested if this soil or sand is very strong. And I think these are all the points which students of architecture need to know. Then it also talks about how the building has to be begun. So these things are all discussed in great detail in the Vastu Granthas. And there are innumerable Vastu Granthas, more than 500 or 600, of which only few Granthas are being published till date. To quote some examples, we can take Granthas like Mayamata, Manasara, Kashyapashilpa Shastra. These are all the Granthas which talk about the Indian architecture system. Then there are some special Vastu Granthas like Manushyalaya Chandrika and Narada Vastu Shastra, which concentrate only on the civic architecture. They concentrate only on the town building and building of the villages. Then there are this Agamas as a literature which deals mainly with the temple. So temple architecture becomes one part of the Agama. Otherwise, the Agamas also talk about the temple rituals, what are the activities that they have to perform in a temple and all those things. So these Agamas and Vastu Granthas, they usually, while they begin, as it is a practice among all the Indian sciences, we give importance to the divine concept of everything. Therefore, we try to define the temple in a divine manner also. So here, the divine perception of a temple becomes like it is associated with the Vastu Purusha. So like they define how the temple is the embodiment of Vastu Purusha, both on plan and on elevation. Here this picture would show that, is my cursor visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can see that.
Okay, you can see, right?
Yes, sir.
So therefore, we can see that here the Purusha figure is lying down, whereas here there is a divine figure's head. We can see. Now this is the elevation of the temple, and this is the plan of the temple till the Gopura. Now this is called as the Vastu Purusha, and he is referred to as the Prasada Purusha. We can see that the entire structure is compared with the body of the Purusha. Now here the face constitutes the Garbhagriha part or Sanctum Sanctorum. The Navaranga, the Shukanasa or the Antarala becomes the neck. We have the Gudamantapa, which is the chest. Then the navel becomes the Balipita. We have the phallus, which is the Dhvajastamba. The feet becomes the Rayagopura or the Pravesha. Now this is the elevation where the Adhisthana becomes the feet of the Purusha. Then we have what is called as the Bhitti or the wall, which is still the waist. Then we have the chest and head, and the pinnacle of the temple is the Shikha of the Purusha. So this is in the Dravida style of temple concept. But what happens, this Dravida Nagara is a division probably which is made in a period, especially by the Western scholars again. But our texts don't mention any such styles separately from Dravida and Nagara. Even in Dravida temple, in the Nagara temples, we can see that the temple plan is compared with the Vastu Purusha, and even in the elevation, we can see that it is compared with the Vastu Purusha. How the entire temple is the embodiment of a Vastu Purusha, and therefore, before even building the structure, during the construction, and after the construction, the builders, the architects, and the sculptors took great care to frequently, instigate the divine power in that particular place and build this temple. At every level, some kind of energy was added to the structure. And basic from the beginning, we can know that through rituals and ritualistic things. Now, this is how a foundation has been suggested by the Vastu Shastra Granthas for building a temple. You can see that there is something called as Garbhanyasa. Garbhanyasa is before building the structure, how will you strengthen the ground, foundation, pit? How will you strengthen it? So it says, see, once you dig, if you see that the soil or the floor, wherever you have dug to that level, if you feel it is strong enough to withstand the structure, there are some tests like soaking it in water and other things done. And even with that, if you feel that this is a hard land, then above that, you place a row of boulders which has used as an elephant head. Once you make a layer of paved boulders of this size, elephant head size, then you pave another level which contains the stones which is the size of a horse head. Now these two levels are done. In the third level, what does the Grantha advises? It says, now you have arranged it. Now you have given a strong platform. But what happens? It may shake. There may be some oscillation in these boulders. So to strengthen them and to stiffen them, in the uppermost layer, you just fill it with pebbles and beat it fine. Make it a very flat platform above which you can start building the temple. And the Upana, which is the lowest molding of the temple, becomes the uppermost covering for whatever foundation they have prepared in this particular temple pit. So this is the foundation pit according to the temple. Now we find it in the Granthas. The texts have talked about it. And they also say, before building the Garbha, you have to place a Kalasha and other things. A Vastu Chakra has to be built, and something called as Pratameshtika. Ishtika means brick. Pratama means first. So the first brick has to be laid. So with all these Shastras, you'll have to do this. Now this is the textual part of it, the literary part of it. What happens? We get an evidence. See, this is from Talakad, where my guide, Professor M.S. Krishnamurthy, had conducted excavations. And these excavations, it brought to light a basement of a temple. See, this is below the base of the temple, that is Adhisthana of the temple. So here we can see how the layers are formed. We can observe the difference in the the range of variation in variant in the colors. Likewise, at the bottommost plane, they have found arrangement of the Pratameshtikas. It is also called as a Vastu Chakra. In both the pictures, I think it's very clearly visible that these Pratameshtikas were arranged. Now, how do we conclude that this was a Pratameshtika? What is the period of it? It can be of a very late origin because bricks are being used even till. How will you date it to a very old period or an ancient period? How to do that is, here you see a pottery of what we call as RCP. They're called as red coated ware. So this kind of pottery, I'll just mention it because these things would not much interest much of your people. But however, these potteries were produced by the people only till the 2nd century AD. After 2nd century AD, we do not get evidence of any such pottery. So naturally, this particular place, this Vastu Chakra, had 4 such potteries placed on it, and they had remnants of some husk of like cereals and rice and paddy and such things. So some kind of precious items and all, where the remnants were found in this particular pottery. So this shows at least the latest, even if you don't want to take it back, you can not bring it further than 2nd century AD. So this shows that by 2nd century AD or even earlier, there was a method, there was a norm, there were texts which guided the temple builders on the basis of which the temple was being built. Now, this is a temple plan. So what is a temple plan? To understand that, here, from here onwards, the the architecture part starts. The basic core of the temple is usually the Garbhagriha. Then there are very humble minor structures which possess only a Garbhagriha. Therefore, temples, a part which a temple has to possess is the Garbhagriha. Without a Garbhagriha, you can have no temple at all. This is the nucleus of the temple. But rest of the others are very, very, very optional. You can have a Garbhagriha just with a Mukhamantapa or just porch attached built to it, or you can have a Garbhagriha with an elaborate Mahamantapa, Mukhamantapa, and surrounded by a lot of other architectural adjuncts also. Here you can see the simple plan where this is the basic temple structure. We have the Garbhagriha, we have an Antarada and a big Godamantapa of the assembly hall. This is a very early temple, this is Virupaksha temple of the Badami Chalukya period. Therefore, we can see that this temple has an internal circumambulatory path, and this is called as a Sandhara temple. Now, why was this necessary? How did it serve the purpose of temple building is a question which is very essential for the architects to know. Now, when they started building temples with stones, they found out that the weight of the stone has to be borne strongly. And if you are building a superstructure also with stone, then naturally the lower walls of the temple must be strong enough to bear the weight of the superstructure above, which is of stone. Therefore, to give more strength, they built 2 layers of walls, and each layer of wall themselves would measure about 3 feet. So 3 feet walls interspersed by say about 3-4 feet of mobile passage, a passage where people can circumambulate. This would concentrate almost, it would give a thickness of about 10 feet. So with this thickness of the 10 feet, they could boldly build a strong superstructure in stone, a prasada of stone, however tall they want. So as this purpose, they also made it a utilitarian part of it. And this shows the earliest temple example. This shows the mature temple example. So by this, in this plan, you can see all the major parts of the temples. I'll just name them. This is the Garbhagriha. You have an Arthamantapa. Then you have a Godamantapa or a Navaranga. Then you have a Mahamantapa. This Mahamantapa has Mukhamantapas on all the 3 sides. Then sometimes you can give an entrance from the Navaranga or the Godamantapa itself on one side. Then we have what is called as the Vahanamantapa. Vahanamantapa is another essential adjunct mentioned in the Vastu Granthas. Vahanamantapa is the which houses the vehicle of the god. Then we have Dhatastamba and Balipita. We also have other adjuncts like we can have a Kalyana Mantapa. These are all the Parivar alayas, like you can have separate shrines for deities like Ganesha, Kartikeya or Subramanya or Muruga, or we can have separate shrines for Chandikeshwara and all those things. Then there is also what is called as a Devi shrine, an Amman shrine built separately. Now, the entire temple complex will have a compound built around it, and it is called as the Prakara. So therefore, the Prakara encompasses the entire structures and provides security for the temple. On the inner wall of the Prakara and on the outer wall also, it's optional. We can have what is called as a series of pavilions It is commonly called as Prakara Mantapa, but the original technical term for this is the Malika. Malikas are, elongated porches or pavilions built attached to the Prakara for the, use of the pilgrims. People who come there on pilgrimage, they can reside there, they could cook their food, they could take rest. For all this purpose, a series of mantapas were built. So this is a Prakara Mantapa, which is popularly called, and otherwise it is, the Malika is the technical term. And outside the temple premises also, we can have a source of water like the Pushkarni, and we can also have other minor pavilions or mantapas for the purpose of Utsava and other things. Excuse me. Can you see anything on the screen?
No, sir, it's a blank.
Blank screen.
I don't know why.
Control Z, sir.
Control Z.
Can you press Control Z? I think it got deleted.
Control Z again.
अभी कंट्रोल Z करना है बाहर जाके करेक्ट कंट्रोल Z now.
Now, can you put that Control Z once, sir?
Wait a minute, I'll do one thing. Okay, is it visible now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, it is visible.
Now, next what we have to understand is what was the how were the temple plans done. So this is a picture which shows a Vinyasa Sutra. Vinyasa Sutra means it is the drawing of the temple plan, or where the contour of the entire structure will be designed. Now, we saw in the earlier slide how a pit is dug and that is filled. Then these and then the Adhisthana and other parts were built above the ground level. But here what happens, if you are building a temple on a rock bed, then how was the vinyasa done? How was temple plan done? So you can see here that a plan was grooved. It was drawn on the temple bed, and throughout you can see it is grooved. And in this groove, the architectural adjuncts or the parts of the Adhisthana was placed and fixed. So this is how a Vinyasa Sutra was drawn for understanding the temple, for planning the structure of a temple. Above that Vinyasa Sutra, everything else was built. Now, this is another, just two examples I will take here to show how magnificent temple building technology of India had developed as early as 8th century. So this is the temple, Kailasa temple from Ellora. I presume that majority of the students know about it. This is a monolithic temple, and this is a temple which was built from the top gradually towards the lower side, and the entire structure beginning from this entrance, the entire the entire structure, the entire complex is excavated out of just one monolithic boulder. A huge hillock, a huge monolithic boulder was selected, and from that they have chiseled out the entire temple. So it was not just structural temples we find. Even among the cave temples or the rock cut sanctuaries, we see that such marvelous work has been achieved by the ancient Indian architects. Now, this is the Prastara Temple, which I was quoting earlier. The original structure is this part till this part. This is a later addition. And here you can see, even here, that this entire structure, the entire height of the structure is about 200 and odd feet, because the Prasada, that is from here to here itself, it is about 188 feet tall, and above that you have a 4 feet stupi placed. And this entire structure stands barely on 5 feet adhisthana, or the foundation of about 5 feet. So this shows how technically developed the Indian sthapati is there. Now I will show the next slides, where we can have a brief introduction of what Indian temple architecture meant. Is my presentation visible?
Yes, sir, we can see that.
Okay. And I think I have about half an hour time, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. 5:15.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Half an hour time. Yes.
Now we will understand the parts of temples in a very kinds and parts of temples in a very basic manner, just as an introduction. And before going to that, I'll just tell about the stylistics. Now, as I was mentioning about the study of Western scholars, they have bifurcated the temples based on the dynastic stylistics. It is again not completely wrong, but there are some minor problems which arise out of it. Now, something cannot be born out of nothing. Out of vacuum, nothing comes. So there must have been some prototype or some other thing which has inspired the coming other form. Therefore, why I am mentioning that this is, the Western scholars have used the styles or some architectural parts for dating purpose. But this doesn't support at all times, because many of the forums, they say that this appeared in 16th century, we can find in an earlier date, or which they say that this was used up to only such and such a date, has been reused during a later period. So with such, there are some evidences like that. Therefore, to understand what is this, see, Hoysala style of temple may appear to be different from the Chola style of temple. True. Where is it different? It is only different in decoration or presentation. But if you go to the basis of the temple, everything is the same. Both Chola, both Pallava, both all Pallava, all Chola, all Pandya, all these temples are built on the same basic principles. It is only the mode of, the medium of construction, mode of construction that differs for various reasons. So therefore, a Chola architecture means, or Chola style means, it doesn't mean that it's something totally different from the Hoysala. It is totally away from this thing. No, they are all the stream of the branches of the same basic thing. So here we will try to understand what are the Devalaya Vastu Vibhagas. Now this one you have already seen, the temple plan. And as I was mentioning, this is the Garbhagriha. You have an Antarala, Ardhamantapa, Gudamantapa or Navaranga. You have a Mukhamantapa, then a Mahamantapa. You have Vahanamantapa, Balipita, Dvajastamba. This is a Rangamantapa, a Kalyanamantapa, the Devi Shrine, and Parivaralayas with a Malika and Prakara. You have Utsavamantapa and water source Pushkari. I'm just shown this to show these are all the parts of a temple on plan. This is the plan for temple. Now the Vastu Granthas mention few types of plans in the Granthas themselves. They are, the major are, the plans can be square on plan, that is Chaturashra. Ayata is a rectangular plan. Then we have what is called as a circular plan called as Vritta, and an apsidal plan is mentioned as a Gajaprishta, where the rear part would be semicircular, where the fore part would be with two right angles. So it's a Gajaprishta and Vritta. Then this is a very rare instance of a plan of a temple which is called as Vrittayata, mentioned in the Agamas and Vastu Granthas. And only one example till date has been found in a place called as Rangasthala of Chikbalapur, very near to Nandi temple. So this shows the temple plan, that the temple has a oval shaped plan. This is Vrittayata. So this is another very rare instance of Sringeri Vidyashankara temple, which is the plan of this temple is Kurmapita. Now these are all the plans which usually the students of architecture will not be taught. While talking about the stylistics, they will give a separate kind of approach towards it. But the temple plan, there are so many variants we can understand. And then there is another division of temples into two categories, two major categories called as Sandhara and Hirandhara. Sandhara means a temple which possesses a circumambulatory path within the main structure of the temple. Hirandhara, hope I am audible and everything is going on fine.
Yes, sir, audible.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can hear you.
I can continue, right? Because I found something blurred suddenly. Okay. So, Nirandhara is a temple where you do not have this inner passage for circumambulation, and it's just an outer Pradakshana Patha, a structure would be given. So, this is another way of differentiating the temple plans. Now, popularly, while talking about the temple plans, I'll just make a stray reference of what is called as the concept of Kuta. We have what is called as Eka Kuta, Dvikuta, Trikuta, and such divisions, which especially we find it in the Hoysala architecture. Now, the elevation of the temple is studied based upon 6 divisions, and these six divisions put together are called as the Shadvargas. Now, if you understand the plan as well as the Shadvargas as per the definitions and descriptions given in the Vastu Granthas, you can describe a temple or understand a temple or explain a temple very easily when it comes to the temple architecture part. Now, these are the Shadvargas of a temple. What are the 6 components of in the elevation of a temple plan is the lowest mold. We have to say, look at bottom up scheme. The lowest mold varga or the adjunct of the temple is the Adhisthana. Adhisthana means the plinth of the structure. And the second part is the Bitti. Bitti is the wall, proper wall of the temple. Then we have what is called as the Prastara. Prastara is called as the entablature, above which you will have a parapet wall or a hand wall built. So this is the ceiling level, and it's the entablature which is called as the Prastara. Then we have what is called as Griva. Griva is usually the recession platform given to support the Shikara above it. Then we have the Shikara, which is like the superstructure, the topmost cupola of the structure, and above that we have what is called as Stupi or the Kalasha. So Stupi is the 6th and the uppermost adjunct of a temple. So when we have to study this temple architecture, if you understand these terminologies and the functions of these adjuncts, it will be very easy to explain or understand what a temple structure is. Now, sometimes even before beginning with the 6 Stradvargas, a temple can be built on an elevated platform. And this elevated platform is called as the Upapita. Upapita means a platform, which is also called as dockle in English. It is mentioned in the text that why do we need to have Upapita? If it is, it's optional, it is not mandatory. It is very much optional. It says, if you have to increase the height or give more strength to the structure or give more elegant appearance for the structure, then you can introduce what is called as an Upapita. So there are three major varieties of Upapitas mentioned in the Vastu Granthas. This is the Vedhibhadra Upapita. We have a Pratibhadra Upapita and then a Manchabhadra Upapita. These are the just names given for the three major varieties of Upapitas. So above this Upapita is what is called as, what is built is called as Adhisthana. What is an Adhisthana? Adhisthana is the plinth of a temple. So what is this function of it? The name itself defines that. This is the beauty of the language of Sanskrit. What happens? You do not just give something for a namesake. Anything has, it will have a definition or a root which would say the purpose of what that is for. Now, Adhisthana is that which withholds the entire structure. So, Adhisthana means to bear upon, to stand upon. So, Adhisthana is a platform above which the entire temple is built. This Adhisthana will have 5 major mandatory parts. This is the Upana, Jagati, Kumuda, Gala and Mahapati. There are also many further divisions and varieties we find, but I don't think for basic knowledge you need this. So the Adhisthana is, sure, the purpose is to provide strength, but at the same time the appearance also should be very elegant and it has to be built a slightly tapering manner so that it would withstand the stone walls which are built above. So Adhisthana is the plinth of the temple, and the text mentioned that there are 2 major Adhishtanas, that is Padabandha Adhisthana and Pratibandha Adhisthana, and innumerable Adhishtanas are derived with the variation of decorations from these 2 main branches. So Padabandha Adhisthana is a very popular, very commonly seen Adhisthana, which is very elegant, at the same time very utilitarian, and it is quite cheap also for the construction. It will not extract a lot of resources, financial resources for its construction. Then what we have is called as a Pratibandha Adhisthana. You can see that this decoration is a bit more exuberant than the earlier one. So once the decoration gets increased, there are other other definitions also given, so that we can understand why this is called as Pratibandha, but let me not dive into all those details. So Pratibandha Adhisthana is the second major division. Then this is the third variety of Adhisthana mentioned, which is the Kapatabandan Adhisthana. Kapata is the drip stone, which is usually placed in the entablature of the temple. But many times to preserve the Adhisthana from frequent damage or earlier damage, this Kapatabandan, this Kapata or the drip stone is given so that water and other things will not seep into the structure and it will be protected. Now the next of the Varga, the second of the Varga is what is called as Bitti. Bitti is also called as Kudya. Bitti is actually the proper wall. As it separates the inner quarters from the outer courtyard, it is called as a Bitti. So a Bitti, according to the Vastu Granthas, it has to be built with considerable girth. So usually a Bitti or the wall of a proper temple will have 3 layers of wall. There is 1 layer of huge undressed stones placed, and it is called as the Antarbitti. So it will be just huge blocks of stone placed one above the other, where the outer face would be just dressed smoothen, but the inner part would be totally undressed. And that's the inner one. And the other one is the outer wall, which is called as Bahya Bitti, where we find the entire outer wall is facilitated for various decoration to be done on them. And apart from these 2, what is the middle portion, which is called as the Madhyantara, where debris are filled to give more strength, and a capstone is placed above these 2 layers of wall. Now this is the general view of a Bitti, where we can see in the earlier slide, you must observe that these are all the decorations we find on a Bitti. This is what is called as the Bitti Pada, which is the minimum decoration for a Bitti. A Bhitti should at least have Bhittipadas. They are the pilasters. They are miniature pillars resembling the pillars. So these are the Bhittipadas. Then we have what is called as Devakoshta. Devakoshta is a niche which accommodates the sculpture of a deity, and there can be sham niches also. There can be niches without any sculpture in it. Then we have what is called as Torana. Then we have Jalavatayana. Jalavatayana is both decorative and utilitarian. Decorative, like the decorations done on the Jalavatayana is very, very executive, while the purpose is to allow light and air to enter the inner premises of the temple. Now, after Jalavatayana, we have what is called as Kumbha Panjara and Stambha Panjara carved on the outer wall of the temple. These are carries. Sometimes they can be spiritually or metaphysically explained how to what a Kumbha Panjara is, and sometimes it is
Hello. Hello, sir.
These are
Slides are not changing.
You can find a Jalavatayana here. You have Bhittipadas here. You have Torana here. These are all the decorative parts of a Bhitti. Now, even in the Bhitti, there are 3 varieties of Bhittis mentioned in the Vastu Granthas. One is called as the Phalaka Kudya or Phalaka Bhitti, then a Jalaka Bhitti, then we have Mrinmaya Bhitti. So, what is the difference? Phalaka means a sheet or a slab. So Phalaka Bhitti is that Bhitti which is made out of either with sheets of wood or with the proper stone wall. So this is the one kind. Next variety of Bhitti is Jalaka Kudya, where the wall itself can have some perforations so that air and light will enter into the inner premises. So Jalaka Kudya is the second variety of Bhitti. Then we have what is called as Mrinmaya Bhitti. Mrinmaya Bhitti is usually, like here, the temple is built wherever strength is required, that is major portions like the wall, sides of the wall, pillars which bear the weight of the temple, and all these things, they are carved out of stone, while the rest of the structure is made only by use of bricks, mortar, and bamboo sticks, wood, and other things. Now we see that these are the decorative members of a Bhitti or the wall, temple wall proper. This is a Torana. You can see Torana is supported by 2 pilasters, thambikas as they're called. Above this we find foliated curvature, arch type of decoration, and these foliations will terminate in the mouths of 2 makaras which are carved on the either side. Then if the niche of a wall houses a murti like this, then it is called a Deva.
Come with you now or?
Now these are the varieties of Jalavatayanas.
Okay.
Now the Vastu Grantha texts, they give names for Jalavatayanas also, separate varieties of Jalavatayanas. Everything is
listening to it.
Some of the names are based on the shape of the hole,
I don't know when
while
it
some
lands.
of them are based on the
I'll
decoration
take it in
of
the
the
phone, I'll
Jalaka.
come.
For example,
Is that fine?
this one is called a Valli Mandala Jalaka. Here you can see that the decoration of Valli Mandala means creeper. The creepers are carved. So the Valli
It's
Mandala
only in the
Jalaka
half
is
of the presentation.
named after the decoration, while this is called a Turyashra. Turyashra means a hole which has 4 right angles. So there are 4 right angles.
You tell me.
Turyaksha,
You tell.
Jalavatana. Like this,
I'll finish in
based
5
on the
minutes.
shape of the
Okay.
hole or the this thing, and then based on the decoration, various names are
Okay.
given. Then this is a very important decoration of the Bhitti. This is Kumbha Panjara and this is Stambha Panjara, and a detailed metaphysical or spiritual explanation can be given about this Kumbha Panjara, but I sincerely feel it would become out of topic for students. Now, this is the Prastara part or the entablature part, which is the third adjunct of a temple from the lower side, and this Prastara is usually, it is made out of layers of paved stone slabs. Now, this is the lowest molding, which is called as Uttara, then we have Valabhi, then we have Kapota, and then we have what is called as Vajana. So these are all the 4 layers of the ceiling of a temple we find. And there can be, a lot of details furnished about these things also. But I really don't know if that minute and micro level introduction is essential here. See, this is the Prastara. Hoysala Prastara. The Uttara of the Uttara and Valabi of the Prastara, they can be decorated with stories and episodes. That is how the texts describe them. See here, we can see a panel of Ramayana. I don't know why. Some obstructions are coming, sorry. See, we can see that the story of Ramayana is carved on the Uttara, and there are a series of goblins carved on the Valabhi. So these are all the decorations that can be done on a Uttara, on a Prastara.
No, I didn't check.
Now, above the Prastara, we have an additional and an optional adjunct, which is usually called as the Hara. Today, in the modern days, we see that this concept is built out of the brick and mortar, and it becomes so joined to the superstructure that we do not understand that this was once a separate structure. So, actually, Hara is nothing but a hand wall or a parapet wall, which is built above the Prastara, above the E. So it is that there, so that these architecture members, like the square plan one is called as Kuta, and the rectangular plan one is called as Shala, and the central one, apsidal plan one is called as Panjara. These 3 motifs which are decorative, see, these can be understood and studied based on their morphology. Then these 3 constitute what is called as Hara. Hara means a series of miniature shrines, a garland of miniature shrines based on their plan and decoration. Now, even in this Hara, there are 2 varieties. One is an Arpita Hara and another is an Anarpita Hara. Here, this is, as I was mentioning while talking about the temple plan, when the wall becomes thicker, when the superstructure becomes taller, then we will have 2 layers of walls built. So such temples will have what is called as Anarpita Hara. Anarpita Hara provides for the devotees to come surrounding the upper 2nd story of the temple also. If a temple has 2 stories. And at such times, what happens? These architectural adjuncts, they have to be separated from the the main structure, wall of the structure. Then we have a passage, and this is called as the Anarpita Hara. So this is the Shala. Shala is an elongated rectangular on plan, which is of a wagon vault kind, called as Sabhakara in Sanskrit, one of the decorative members of the Hara. These Shalas are usually found in the center part of the temple, so that they will provide more stability and weight, so that the structure will not move easily. Then we have Kutas. Kutas can be placed even on a circular plan wall or whatever, and this Kuta is square on plan, while the Shala is rectangular on plan, and Kutas are always placed in the corners of the temple. Then we have what is called as the Panjara. See, here you can see the plan of a Panjara. Panjara has to be apsidal. So apsidal plan of a Panjara. Now these are the 3 upper parts of the temple. This is the Vedi. Vedi, usually the term itself says, Vedi is the platform which supports these 3 angas. This is the Griva. Why is it called Griva? As neck is a recessed organ in the body. This is a bit recessed from the projecting Shikara. Then what the square one we see is the Shikara. Above that we have Stupi. Again, the Griva and Shikara are classified based on their shape. Many times if the Griva, if the Shikara takes a particular shape, Then the shikara has to be placed on the here. You see a square griva while a square shikara is placed above. Now this griva can be decorated with the sculptures of what is called as griva devatas. Devatas murtis which are placed on the griva devatas. And there is another utilitarian purpose for this also. Suppose you don't know to which creed this temple belongs. So outside itself, if you see the creed, if you find a sculpture of some Shiva devotee or Shiva himself, something like that, then you can conclude that this is a Shiva temple or a Vaishnava temple. The creed can be identified. Now there are three major branches of shikaras, which are also there. Is this I'm mentioning broad classifications. Further, they are divided into various. This thing will not go into that. So, if the shikara is square on plan, it is called as Brahmachanda. If the shikara is octagonal on plan, it is called as Vishnu Chanda. And if the shikara is circular and plan, then it is called as Rudra Chanda. Now, this is about the major structure of the temple. Now, we have to understand one more thing. This Shatvarga concept, that is the elevation with the 6 adjuncts of the temple, is applicable only to the Garbhagriha, which is called as the Vimana. So, because no other part of the temple will have the upper 3 parts, all the parts. You may quote Rajagopura as an example. Apart from Rajagopura, any mantapa or any other things, if you see, you can discern what kind of this thing is that. So this is a Rudra Chanda which is circular on plan. Now there are various mantapas associated with the temple. Some are very mandatory, very essential, while some are optional, some are utilitarian with a very great purpose. So these are the various mantapas, we can just understand them. See, this is the basic Mukha Mantapa of a temple which a temple can possess. This is a small, serene, humble temple with just the Mukha Mantapa in front of it. Now, even the Vahana Mantapa, we have 2 varieties. The Vahana Mantapas are of 2 varieties. One is the Nandi Mantapa and another is the Garud Mantapa. You see, we have to enjoy the aestheticity of our sculptors. As Nandi is an oxen and animal group, what is called as Pashuvarga, the Nandi Vahana Mantapa is built as an open pavilion, while Garuda is of the Pakshivarga. So usually we house the birds in a cage. Therefore, the Garuda Mantapa becomes an enclosed kind of Vahana Mantapa. So these are all the nuances we have to observe, how the sculptors had their imagination, how they applied it, and all those things we can understand. The next variety of mantapa is a Maha Mantapa, which is optional. See, the previous 2 mantapas are mandatory, the Mukha Mantapa and Vahana Mantapa. But from here onwards, it is very optional. Maha Mantapa will be an open, spacious hall attached to the main structure, and various activities. It's a multi-purpose pavilion. You can perform puja, you can just sit there and meditate, you can sing, that can be used for other utsavas. So like that, Mahamantapa is a very spacious open pavilion which is attached to the main structure. Then we have the Kalyana Mantapa. There is a practice of performing the wedding of the Lord and the deity. So here these Kalyana Mantapas are specially built, and as we know, usually the marriage ceremony is considered as very colorful and something which has to be celebrated. So to show the celebration, the Kalyana Mantapas usually are carved in great detail with great intricacy, and the decorations, the beauty is just, it has to be seen to understand how it is done. Then we have Ranga Mantapa. What are these Ranga Mantapas? Ranga Mantapas are those Mantapas which will have a stage at the rear end of the Mantapa, stage or a platform, and that is why it is called, and various cultural activities like the reciting of Vedas, reciting of Puranas, dancing, music, and all these things are conducted in a Ranga Mantapa. Then this is the example of Vasanta Mantapa. Vasanta Mantapa is the spring Mantapa. We know that seasons vary, and the Indians have the concept of celebrating throughout all the seasons. All the 6 seasons we celebrate. So likewise, during the Vasanta Rutu or the Chaitra Masa, a lot of colorful activities, because the newly blossomed flowers are available, the mangoes are available. So these are all the beauty things. So therefore, they used to have this, enjoyable life after the tedious cultivating period. So after the cultivating period is over, they will get what is called as this Vasanta, and they will enjoy the fruits of all those things. And that is why a Vasanta Mantapa is built in a temple with such great grandeur and other. So during here, the activities like sprinkling color water or decorating with flower balls, all these things are done in a temple. Now, this is a Dolotsava Mantapa and Utsava Mantapa. Dolotsava means a swing festival where the god is kept in swung, and then Utsava Mantapa is when the deity is carried on a procession outside the temple. Even today we see that. We need a certain points where it can be brought down and placed so that people can come and have leisure darshana of it. So therefore, Utsava Mantapas were simple, unornate, humane structures, humble structures, which had this purpose of enshrining the god for a temporary period. So this is the Malika. Malika is usually the veranda kind of structure which is built attached to the prakara. This can be built on the outer wall or the inner wall. Both the sides it can be built. And this is again, as I said, a multi-purpose thing. It is the continuous prakara mantapa, as it colloquially called. This is the Malika. So this is about the basic adjuncts of the temple architecture. And I have tried to give definition of some of them. So this is about understanding the temple architecture based on indigenous texts. This is about temple architecture. Now the questions are welcome. I'll just take a small break of a minute maybe and come back.
Okay, sir.
Students over in that Zoom, if you have any questions, please put down in the chat so that I can transfer it down to the other medium. Is it audible? Students in Zoom.
Yes, sir. If there are any questions, we can discuss.
Yes, sir. Is there any question from the audience?
Among
Yes.
audience, are there any?
Meera
Anyone have
Vishwanath
questions?
has raised. Yes, Meera, you can go ahead. She wants to ask a question.
Good evening, sir. So you had mentioned about this division of temple elevation into 6 parts. So can you please tell me which all are the textbooks you are making? I mean, sorry, the shastras you are making reference over here.
As I said, there are a lot of Vastu Granthas which repeatedly mention, like Mayamata, Manasara, you have Kashyapa Shilpa Shastra, there are many, Nibandha, there are many texts, and Agamas also mention these 6 major parts as Shadvargas.
Okay, so do they say that these are this 6 division is mandatory,
Yes,
or is it?
see, there is a definition of what a Vimana is. Vimana is the outer part of the Garbhagriha. The main temple is called as Vimana. So it says that Upanadi Stupi Paryantam Vimanam. That shows that all these 6 things are the mandatory parts of a temple. Of the main,
Okay.
that I am telling, the nucleus of the temple, the Garbhagriha.
So it doesn't mention whether it is a Dravida or a Nagara temple, just a temple.
The distinction of Dravida and Nagara is a very later concept, and sometimes it is a bit confused and mixed up by the scholars. But one broad division we can surely accept, that Nagara style temples are found more in the northern part of the country, while the Dravida is on the peninsular India part we can find.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Any other question? Okay. Sir, I have one or two questions mainly. One is that a claim about the Buddhist architecture and Hindu architecture, the timeline, that which one is preceding which one. So when you claim that earlier temples were like with a wooden temple or bamboo structures, we don't have any material evidence across the landscape from Afghanistan till Assam and from Kashmir till Kanyakumari. It's impossible.
No, to date it before Buddhism, till now we have not got. There are two things here. Now, there are a lot of Indus Valley sites which have been excavated, but the scholars are not trying to apply their mind towards if there is any religious structure, like a temple or whatever. They are just they have a citadel park and something like that. So the proper temple evidence we do not have. But when we come to the southern part, there is one evidence which is contemporary to the Buddhist period, the Gudimallam Parashurameshwara temple, which can be dated to around 150 BC.
Okay. So that structure material is what? Brick?
That is, no, it is, it is built in various stages. So like that, it's kind of mishra. The earliest thing we find some stone evidences, then it has been, some mortar has been applied. So like that, it has underwent a lot of renovations also.
Okay. And the second question was like that you have already answered, I think, the terminology called Nagar and Dravida. So when I read this Adam Hardy, so he is claiming that this terminology has been used in the ancient text.
Yes, okay. I'll tell you two things here.
Where it was like first mentioned, that is what like I want.
No, that is what the confusion, entire confusion is it. You do not have something called as earliest mention, next mention.
Okay.
There is one popular verse found in almost all the texts, which says the structure which is square on plan is Nagara, Nagara, which is octagonal in plan is Dravida, which is circular on plan is Vesara. This one verse, it is repeated in almost all the Shastra Granthas.
Okay.
But on a thorough reading, studying of that, we can understand that it is a later interpolation. Second thing is, there is one text called as Kamikagama, which is very popular. That tries to define what these are to a great extent, which can be applied and analyzed. Here also, the geographical boundaries are not very distinctly mentioned. But they say the one which is built in the Nagaras or township or the Nagara, and one which is, and Dravida is not the regular term. Many times it is replaced by a term called as Dramida. So, that thing. And you have another problem here. Now, we have some, remnants of temples of the Gupta period, like the Deoghar temple and other things.
Yeah.
If you observe them, many of the features are very much like a Dravida temple. So, if you observe the Vishnu temple of Deoghar, the Dwarabandas, the Kostas, the Deva Kostas, all those things. So, we really did not know what kind of superstructure it had. But we can understand that the arrangement of stones, not the arrangement, I mean to say, the appearance, on appearance, we can see that the bands of an Nagara temple are vertical arrangements, while the Dravida temples have a pyramidal or a horizontal arrangement. So this is the basic difference of a Nagara and Dravida structure.
Okay, so might be because of that they found majority of those temples in this part, so they started connecting it with the landscape.
Yes, and that's why the unfortunate thing is we have lost many of the Gupta temples.
Yeah.
And they are all later this thing. And to say again, I am not disqualifying Adam Hardy. Adam Hardy has a more of just an engineer aspect towards the temple.
Yes, geometrical pattern.
Geometrical patterns, like that.
My third question was like your reference for this Pradeshwara foundation is 4 feet, like because one book
5
I was
feet.
referring, it
5
was
feet, 5 feet.
yeah 5 feet. So one book I was referring, it was saying half of the temple height is the foundation.
No, it's impossible.
Any reference, sir? Any reference
Yeah,
book?
there is one temple, Rajarajeshwara Temple itself, by the name, the Rajarajeshwara Temple published by ASI. You can go through it.
Have they did
Because
any?
I tell you, this might have been just a guesswork. When these structures were being built during the British period, they had this logic that the foundation should be half of the height of the wall.
Yeah.
So they might have taken that and put it there. Otherwise, Pradeshwara, see, there are some books by R. Nagaswamy, who recently expired. He was an age-old, grand-old.
Yes, I know. I have read
You
him.
can read his books. He has written on Pradeshwara Temple also.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Because like new temple, if you are saying this current Ram temple is getting built, Ayodhya wala, there also similar technique they're using on there. That plinth is getting like 20 feet or more than 20 feet.
The problem is, I don't know what it is. In those days, the calculations were very accurate according to the stone they are using, the granite, the girth of this thing. But I really don't know if that kind of thing is continued even to this day.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Any other question? Sir, you.
Sir, I have one question. It's about these series of functional spaces such as mandapas.
Yes.
In Dravidian Vijayanagara style, we have
Yes.
come across this Kalyana Mandapa, Ranga Mandapa, Mukha Mandapa. For different purposes, as you explained, there are many series of pillared halls open, partly closed. This is how we see. But in northern part, how come these many mandapas we don't find elaborate requirements of mandapas? Maybe one or two we will find, but not so pillared halls, spacious pillared halls, and a good layout of many mandapas. We find them missing. Is there any good reason?
Okay. See, basically, when talking about northern temples, we have to understand one thing. The majority of the original structures are lost. We do not have them. They have been completely vandalized. So whatever the existing structures we have, somewhere begins from the 13th century. We have 13th century temples built around the Rajputana area, in the Orissa area. But if you take up Martanda temple as an example, which is totally vandalized and in a very dilapidated state in Kashmir, we can see that there are a lot of sub-shrines built. So this thing was there, but while rebuilding, probably the resources were not much, but there are one or two examples of elaborate planned temples like the Sun Temple of Modhera, where we find some dilapidated structure in and around the main this thing. But if you are going further north, what happens? That is the same problem with the coastal temples also. The coastal temples and the northern temples, like what we find in Nepal and other places, they are all built on hills and mountainous regions. So naturally, you cannot have very elaborate temples like what we find in Madurai, Vijayanagara, Hampi, and all those things.
Sorry, this in the South Indian these temple complexes, we see this 1,000 pillared hall, and I see in Sri Rangam and at Meenakshi temple, they are put into use as museums now, displaying all artifacts and artifacts and sculptural, the remains and preserved. But originally, what was the intention, and is it meant as dormitories for devout pilgrims and education people, or is it like was it a factory and where they have tried built? What was the original intention of building these elaborate pillared halls, sir?
Okay. Here, historically, we have to understand, during the Vijayanagara period only, the number of mandapas dominantly increased. Because that was the time when they wanted each and every civilian to take part in the temple activities.
Yes.
And many a times there were unexpected wars, and they had to give asylum for the common civilians. See, earlier wars of our Indian history, though there were very great wars fought between the kings, that never bothered the common citizens or civilians. Neither did it hurt the culture of any state.
Yes.
For example, the Vikramaditya II, grandson of Pulakeshi II, goes up to Kanchi and wins over Kanchi and sees the Rajasimheshwara temple there,
Yeah.
which was built by Nandivarma Pallava, Rajasimha Pallava. He sees that and he gives some donations and comes back. He does not destroy the temple.
Yeah.
So likewise, we had no problem with the culture or literature of that place. It was not bothered. But Vijayanagara period, it so happened, it had to provide asylum for civilians during the war time and all those things. And it also had to involve, because unless and until you get involved into the temple culture, the feeling of ours, this is our culture, this is our responsibility, that would not come in a common person. For that, they increase the activities, and that is why these pillars are usually called as Ayirakal Mandapam in Tamil. In the Tamil speaking areas, it is called as Ayirakal Mandapam, but it need not have 1,000 pillars. They are all just hypostylic halls, mainly to facilitate the pilgrims or provide asylum for such people during the war times.
Any question, Harchar?
One more,
Huh?
one more, please.
Yeah, my colleague has another.
One more clarification, sir. That one that you said that Pradakshina Path is actually that structural intervention, as you were saying, sir. It's not a religious part. It's not a religious element. But to raise the height, they wanted a little more width for the wall. So,
Okay, I got the question. Circumambulating is a religious activity. I did not say pradakshina. Coming pradakshina is a religious activity. I am not telling that it's not a religious activity.
okay.
What I am telling is, in the early temples, when they were building, two different walls with a narrow gap in between or a broader gap, the intermediate gap served the purpose of a pradakshina coming around the temple.
Okay.
If you take Hoysala temples, they are not Sandhara, but you have a Jagati built to come around the temple.
Yeah.
So that is there. Pradakshina is a traditional religious activity. The space between the two walls served as an internal pradakshina.
So that interestingly, they have integrated this structural system also, and that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
See, in the case of Pradeshwara Temple again, the outer wall of the outer face of the inner wall also has beautiful paintings and sculptures done on them.
Yeah.
So the purpose is, when the people are coming around, this was just to educate everybody. It was one way of educating people.
Yes, sir. One more question regarding the timeline. You said like the Hinduism. I mean, which got earlier, which was earlier, sir? Hinduism or Buddhism?
See, it's a very practical thing. But first of all, I usually don't like to use the term Hinduism.
Sanatana Dharma.
However, it is
Sanatana
it is
Dharma.
Vedic rather.
Vedic, yes, sir.
See,
Yes, sir.
when you talk of, if you take Ashwagosha's Buddha Charita as an authority,
Okay.
Buddha himself, okay, he talks about the earlier rulers and earlier Siddhantas.
Yes, sir.
So therefore, naturally, this is more ancient. And even the earliest literary work like Ramayana mentions Vedas. But you don't find the mention of any Buddhist theology in the early texts like Vedas or Upanishads.
Okay.
So then naturally Buddhism is later. Buddhism is a very recorded and understood this thing.
Okay. Okay.
See, what happened was, the structural evidences the earlier Western scholars got were from the Buddhist creed. So they presume that earlier it was only Veda, Yajnas and Yagas conducted by the Brahmins. Therefore, no temple activity was known. But by seeing the Buddhist people building chaityas and doing pujas, these people learned how to do the communal prayers and they started. This was one argument placed by them. See, that is because of their limitation. We need not, there is no harm in discarding it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yes, sir.
And again, Buddhism is again our own native religion. It is not something alien.
Yes, sir.
It is not something like Islam or Christianity. The principles which Buddha teaches is all the Upanishadic principles only.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Sir, yeah, yeah, yes.
Please repeat your it got disconnected. Please repeat. Bharat Airavata. Okay. See, there are three things you have to understand here. Pallavas were the pioneers of structural temples in the Tamil region, right? So the earliest inscription of Mandapata cave of Mahendra Varma says that he has started building something without the use of brick, mortar, and anaishtikam, adaru, and all those things he mentions. So in that, so this is the pioneering. So it was actually the stone temple building was in the stage of experimentation. So they had to give more importance and stress upon the structure than on the sculptural forms. But there are some predominant sculptures, like they have never missed carving Somaskanda in all their temples. So like that, there are some sculptural evidence. But by Chola period, there are two points here. One, the building technology also had improved. At the same time, there is this distinct agamas like Karanagama or Muktagama. The temple of Tanjavur is supposed to be built on the Makutagama basis. So they started mentioning particular forms of the deities to be enshrined around the major structure. So therefore, that is why we find in the Kailasnatha temple of the Pallava period in Kanchipuram, there are a series of Devakullakas built around the temple, built to the Prakara wall. So these are all according to the mentioning of the Agamas, the forms of the deities which had to be, which can be prayed by the sadhakas. Thirdly, Airavateshwara temple is the last of the series which you are mentioning, which was almost built in the mid of 13th century. You have to understand that by then there was a matrimonial alliance with the Hoysala rulers, and the Hoysala rulers had interfered a lot with the politics of the Cholas during that period. So the influence of the Hoysala architecture is reflected on the Airavateshwara temple. There is another point, I don't know if you have observed it personally or not. In the early Chola temples, they never used the Simhapada stambhas, the pillars with a lion base. The Simhapada stambhas were greatly used by the Pallavas. Now, as the Pallavas were the enemies and opponents of Cholas, they had overthrown them. They did not want to continue with the Simhapada. You don't have many references of no reference of Simhapada in the early Chola. But by the period Darasaram temple was built, either the rivalry was forgotten or whatever, they have used a lot of Simhapada stambhas. That is because the Hoysalas adopted it in their region of Vikramapura, that is in and around Tiruchinapalli. Yes, yes. I really don't know if the land has anything to do that, But historically, one thing I can say is, see, all those spatial temples are not Chola temples. They were all extended and extensively built only during the Nayaka period and Vijayanagara period. Many people have this confusion. Only the central sanctum. See, one more thing you have to understand. If you take a proper regular Chola temple, the Chola temple on plan always possessed a Garbhagriha and an Ardhamantapa. That's all. It was only after the 12th century and onwards, they started attaching an assembly hall to it. So before that, it was only the Garbhagriha and the Ardhamantapa which was built. And Cholas had this habit of building temple in each and every village. So they were great builders. But religiously, Kumbakonam gained a lot of prominence because of all the three darshanas people getting associated there. And that is how it developed as an agrahara. That may be a reason. And they actually structurally they grew only in the post Vijayanagara period, Vijayanagara and post Vijayanagara period. Club brass. See, there were many ruling dynasties, even like Banas, and see, it depends on what category they were. If they were feudal, they were just feudatories or something, I don't think they can claim a stele for themselves. That is one part. And again, as I said, we need some inscriptional evidence or the literal evidence for the existence of a temple.
Shall we close the session? Hoping that others don't have any questions. Don't have questions, I believe. Sir Manoj sir.
Okay.
Sir, we are extremely thankful to your presentation, enlightening presentation, and clearing many of our good doubts, and your systematic presentation of say Dravidian style and its various parts with its illustrations and which we are don't come across and don't find in many of our books. It's difficult to find, and very valuable, invaluable sources of information with right illustrations. You have elaborated the aesthetical the composition and many parts of Dravidian style. We are very thankful to have you, and given your valuable time to our audience, and we would extremely thankful to you, sir. Manoj sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, we will close the session. I'll speak to you a little later, sir, afterwards.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your interesting and enlightening presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, students, for joining.
Thank you, sir.
Sasikumar, the question that you asked, no? So that is one. Gopurams are made so tall. For that, it's more like a lighthouse, man. People could identify. So in and around the Gopuram only, the living of the people were also there. So when people are going outside and coming, temples having Gopuram is also very easy. And even now, if you go on the road, no, as in like far away, if you see a Gopuram, people tend to understand that that's where the god is. They start praying, right? It need not be exactly the deity. Even if it is for the Gopuram, if you worship itself, it is more than comfortably enough. And mandapams were created for a lot of gatherings and then like events and all to happen. Okay, so that was the reason. Understood.
So only for that purpose, mandapas are created.
And like people could stay. See, for earlier Shiva temples and all, it's been now it is having you can lock the Shiva temple and all. That is a rule right now. But earlier Shiva temples will never be closed because Shiva himself is an Aghori,
Yeah.
and then he's been as a saint. All the saints and everyone they live there only. Now it's been changed. So mandapams and
Yeah.
everything, a closed space is required, no, for people to
Yes.
stay. Like people like there will be definitely nomads who come from one place to another to actually take care of it. A few, that's why we see Pradakshina mandabas also. If it's in a hill on the way, in between small mandabas are there. They need to rest and think, no. So for that,
Yeah.
like we had a lot of place, but still enclosed space is required, right? For at least for shelter, or at least for events to happen, or at least for yagnas to happen.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Any other doubts?
No, sir.
Thank you.